And many people, when they first encounter it, myself included, have this knee-jerk reaction to reject it instantly. And I kind of regret that, and I hope that today you can just give the idea, just say 5 minutes, give it an open mind. I promise you it will be worth your time. Okay, I think it's, there we go. So the boring slide, a little bit about me. So I'm a software engineer. I'm based in London, previously from Cape Town. I run a small consultancy there, so I've been working for some larger corporations. And in my spare time, I'm doing a part-time master's in software engineering at Oxford. And why I decided to give this talk today is that I've been a part of many digital transformations in London. And the common thread between these transformations is that they're all going from multi-repos to monorepos. And I thought that it'll be good to share my lessons learned, the pros and the cons of doing this, because it is quite an intricate subject. But on to the interesting things, what I'll be talking about and what you'll be learning from this presentation today. So firstly, I'll be defining what a monorepo is, and I'll be talking you through a case study of my time at Hsbc when we implemented this and what it looks like, so that you can see it in context. I'll try to give a balanced review of the advantages and disadvantages of using a monorepo so that you can see if it's a good fit for your organization. And finally, if there's a little bit of time at the end, I'll talk about the tooling available for implementing a monorepo. So, what is a monorepo? Well, monorepo is a single repository holding the code of multiple projects which may or may not be related in some way. So which may or may not be related in some way. So you could have a small organization, say it's a pizza place, and you could have your web client and your web server, and then your organization grows a little bit, so you want to make a mobile app. But you put the mobile app in the same repository, and you have your microservices and everything in one place, so that you could have, if it's quite small, you could have about 30, 40 developers, all from different backgrounds and contexts, working in the same place, creating PRs in the same place. And this is about the time when everyone who listens to this idea thinks this is completely ridiculous. Why would you ever want to do such a thing? But it's not an original idea of mine. Google and Facebook are the biggest users of this concept. I think Google has 25,000 developers committing 16,000 lines of code a day, or 16,000 commits a day. Their repository has 32 million commits over their entire 18-year history. Something similar with Facebook too. So it works at an enormous scale. At Hsbc, we had about 500 developers, about 16 different projects, and the client I'm currently contracting for, Hive, has about 20 developers and 3 projects. So it works at all ends of the spectrum. So let me talk you through my time at Hsbc so that you can see how it would work in context. So as part of their digital transformation, what they wanted us to do is just break off one tiny little bit of it, which in this case was a loan. So we had a loans client and loans server in one repository, and build that out and do it really, really well. And so we delivered that, that was effective, and now they wanted us to continue their digital rewrite and do their other projects. So along came credit cards, which is CC over here, and we motivated to do this in the same repository because it was more of a front-end thing, where our clients were built out of React.js. So we could share components between the different projects. We could share libraries, share utilities, share test frameworks, so that they could build off the work that we did and get going much faster. And they delivered in about a half to a third of the time. This expanded. We built a React Native application, so we could continue the shared components model. And then this is just quite a small snapshot, but over about a year, we extended to 16 different projects, Canada, Poland, India, everywhere, and it was about 500 developers committing on this. But it's not just a front-end concept. We had our microservices in the repository too, so our various servers would use our authentication service, credit check service, balance service, amongst many, many more. And there's a lot of shareability amongst that too. And the big advantage of doing that, and I'll talk a bit about this more, is that there's just one version for these microservices. So if you make a change to the authentication service, you better make sure that it doesn't break any of the downstream consumers of that contract. So that it requires a lot more communication, a lot tighter team to make this work. But the great thing is that everyone's always up to date, and yeah, you reduce a lot of your code debt. Advantages. So what are the advantages of doing something in this manner? Well, firstly, you have a single lint build, test, and release process. So you can share a lot of the building blocks amongst your various projects. Typically, you have these siloed little repositories that teams own, and then they build their own way of doing things, and there's no consistency. With a monorepo, you just have one way of doing things. This is also a bit of a con, because it requires a lot of effort to get to this place, to reap these rewards. But I'll talk about that in a little while. The second is that it's easier to coordinate changes across the code base, because it's all in one place. So if we take one example, on the front end, the designers at Hsbc now want to change how a button looks or how the colors look. We can do that in one PR and impact that on all the projects in one go. So typically you would have to go in 16 different repositories and coordinate with many people. Here, you can just execute. There's unified versioning, which I've talked about a little bit before, and that there's just one version for your microservices, and that's the master, whatever is on master right now. There's extensive code sharing and reuse, so your teams can get going a lot faster, particularly on the front end. If you're using React, it's an unbelievably powerful way of doing things. You can change common code and roll it out easily. I've talked about changing shared components, but you can also, if you want to make a server-side change, you can also do your client-side change in one PR and roll it out. You don't have to do this like stepped deployment. And here's an interesting one, that there are no artificial boundaries between the teams and projects. The friction to doing things and sharing and collaboration is reduced, and that's something you only really see when you have a monorepo. So what we did is we used the Spotify model, where teams are siloed in cross-functional teams, but then there are guilds that emerge from this, and these are people that are interested in testing or interested in some particular aspect of the code base. They meet together, and then they come up with ideas, and then roll it out for the entire code base. So here's a lovely little quote, that although it seems counterintuitive at first, using a monolithic source control approach can be very powerful if you're building a microservices-based infrastructure. So I'm sure as developers, we're all a bit nervous of monolithic approaches. We've all been burnt by them in the past, and there's a big movement to using microservices. But there are advantages and disadvantages to using both. And if you have microservices wrapped up in this monolithic container, you can kind of reap the rewards of both. So it's a very cool way of doing things. But this is not all for free. There are some disadvantages to doing this. The first, anecdotally, is that it's very scary for new developers to a code base. Coming into a project, seeing 250 developers committing all the time, PRs being pushed out nonstop, it's pretty intimidating and hard to find your way around. The second one, and kind of ties into my fourth one nicely, and this is the real big one, the big mothership, that your CI needs more complex configuration, how you do builds, how you do testing, how you do those things. It requires a lot of upfront investment to reap the benefits. So for example, if you push a change to some microservices that a lot of clients depend on, you're going to need to run all those tests, but only for those projects, because you don't want to run your tests for every single project in your whole monorepo. Otherwise, you'll never ever get anywhere. Which ties into your build and test bloat, a problem that we had at Hsbc, where if you made one change to something, say your shared components directory, things would take 30, 40 minutes to build just to run your tests, and that's just unfeasible. So your DevOps team needs to be on point for this to happen. And then the third one, that very large-scale monorepos have to deal with technical limitations of certain source control systems. I'm not sure if this is a problem we'll have in this room, but at Facebook and Google scale, they have to patch Git and do all kinds of crazy, funky things. But at Hsbc, 500 developers, 16 projects, we didn't run into any problems at all. So tooling, this is very, very brief, but if you're interested, there are two tools that you can use for JavaScript-related projects. There's Learner and Yarn workspaces. I could probably do talks on these on their own, But I highly recommend digging into their documentation, giving it a go, maybe pushing out a small scale project of your own. I think you'll find it very, very rewarding. So yeah, thank you so much. Please get in touch.